In the 1990s, banks from Virginia to Connecticut were under attack. The robber always struck alone, and always on Friday, just before closing. January 1997, Philadelphia was in his sights. In a suburb called Lima, PNC bank manager Don Bressler was about to lock up for the weekend.
It was Friday. Fridays are always a long day in a bank, and the first thing that you're looking forward to is 6:30 closing time.
But it looked like they had one last customer.
6:29, I look up, I see somebody coming in, and then that person just started yelling.
A man in a Halloween mask rushed towards her and ordered her not to look at him.
It took a little bit to kind of register what was going on, and I looked at the person, and my first inclination was just to think it's a joke, somebody playing a joke on us.
But this was the real deal. In a matter of seconds, the robber had taken charge of the whole bank.
The individual that was responsible for these robberies was very meticulous, paid a great attention to detail, never seemed to be in a rush, always seemed to be in control, very intelligent.
He just really seemed like he knew what he was doing, and that's what was really so kind of terrifying about the whole thing.
With the staff subdued, the robber leapt up onto the counter and demanded cash.
That's when I crawled off into a side office, and then I was able to call 911 that at least somebody would know, what was going on and that we would get some kind of help.
It was a dangerous move. Don knew this guy was a pro.
It just seemed like he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows this building so well.
But then everything was over in a flash.
It was just very quick and very easy, just hop over. He got his cash, he got his bag, he jumped back over the counter and just ran out. And I bet the whole thing didn't take more than probably a minute and a half, but it seemed just like forever. I can still kind of see it playing out slow motion in my mind.
By the time police responded to the 911 call, the robber was long gone. A flawless getaway. Not a single clue left behind. No one could even give a good description of the man. All that stood out was the mask. Whoever he was, he seemed to have vanished into thin air with $26,000 in cash. Not bad for 90 seconds worth of work. But a mere drop in the bucket compared to the millions he'd already snatched. He'd hit at least 50 banks over the past 3 decades, and he always stayed one step ahead of the law.
Friday night bank robber is someone who had eluded the FBI for many years. They believed that he was responsible for bank robberies up and down the eastern seaboard of the United States.
Police scoured the criminal underworld for a shadowy hold-up man. Little did they know, they were matching wits with an Ivy League graduate, tucked away in suburbia. When it came to the high-speed stick-up, the Friday night bank robber was the best in the business. And he had the track record to prove it. 3 decades, 50 banks, millions of dollars, and still a free man.
He planned on getting in those banks, getting the money, getting out, escaping. And for the most part, he was very successful over a 25 to 30-year time period doing that.
The robber seemed almost superhuman, but behind the mask was a man with a regular American upbringing. His name was Karl Gu Gaugin.
He comes from an immigrant family, came from Armenia, grew up in the suburbs. His parents were very hardworking. Father owned a local automotive repair shop.
In the mid-1970s, Karl joined the Army. He was stationed out at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where he received special training in weapons, survival, and self-defense.
Karl went to the University of Pennsylvania on statistics and worked on a doctoral thesis at Penn State. Fascinated by the laws of probability, and a great deal of it was, what's the risk?
Although he'd worked as a statistician for Penn State, Gu Gatien made his living robbing banks. He even paid his taxes, claiming that his income came from gambling. In addition to his impressive brain power, Karl was a black belt in karate. All in all, he was an extremely accomplished man.
And you would think that he could have been a success in any endeavor in life. So no, he was not your stereotypical bank robber. Far from it.
Gu Gatien perfected his art with impeccable skill. He read statistical books on probability. He studied maps in public libraries. He spent weeks planning every aspect of his robberies. First, he would select his target.
Typically, they were rural banks off on a major highway.
Traveling up and down the East Coast, Gu Gatien looked for banks that fit his requirements. He discovered that banks on the outskirts of cities have less security. It takes longer for police to show up, and after the heist, it's much easier to disappear into the landscape.
And the banks were all located near a wooded area that had helped effectuate its escape.
Gu Gatien also used statistics to help him choose the best day of the week to hit a bank.
He always hit on Fridays, and always when the bank was about to close, the logic, I've been told, was that that's when they would have the most cash on hand in a given week.
Gu Gatien selected the perfect bank, the perfect day, and even the perfect time of year to strike.
The robberies occurred between the month of October to April during daylight savings time.
That's the time when the weather would be cool enough that it wouldn't look unusual for somebody to be coming into a bank with gloves and heavy clothing on.
Forever the good student, Gu Gatien did his homework. He knew every single detail about the banks he was targeting.
He was very meticulous. He would do surveillance. He would watch for sometimes days.
He would know who the managers were, who the employees were, who the main customers were. This was really an extensive effort.
In the planning phase, sometimes he would sit outside of the bank from 7 in the morning, sometimes 5 in the morning, until he robbed it close to closing at 7 or 8 at night.
Always trying to outsmart the cops, Gu Gatien opted away from the traditional getaway car.
He had a van in which he stored a dirt bike, an off-road dirt bike, and he would park up to a few miles away from the bank that was his target bank. He would ride to within a mile or so of the bank and then hike the rest of the way in.
He'd don his mask in the woods, then prepare for yet another dramatic entrance.
He entered the bank 2 minutes prior to closing.
Gu Gatien would run into the bank and immediately take control. His MO was to get the money fast. He always kept himself to a 3-minute limit. Every one of his robberies followed the same pattern.
He would tell them, don't look at me, or something to that effect. He'd have a pistol, and he would ordinarily walk up to the teller station and leap up onto the counter from a standstill, which was really quite remarkable because these teller stations are often very high. And from that point, he would wave the gun and he would hit the teller drawers. And he would leave on foot through the woods and make his escape.
By now, police would be on their way, but Gu Gatien was one step ahead. Since they came by road and he got away cross-country, their paths would never cross. His disguise, simple but brilliant, was yet another line of defense.
He always wore a mask, either an old man type Halloween mask or a ski mask. He'd be covered from head to toe, including gloves.
Witnesses could never agree on any distinguishing characteristics. They couldn't even tell his age or race.
Some tellers had a difficult time telling whether he was African American, white, Hispanic, Asian, because his body was so well covered with gloves, with a mask.
The Friday night bank robber was practically a phantom, impossible to trace.
The thing that was most striking is that with the well over 100 witnesses who we interviewed, there was only one witness who even caught a glimpse of his eye color. There were a handful of witnesses who knew what his hair color was. There was very little in the way of usable information in terms of what he looked like.
Gu Gatien had devised the perfect way to rob a bank. He left no clues or forensic evidence behind. No one could identify him. But specially trained profiler Raymond Carr had some theories about the man behind the mask.
He was definitely a loner, someone who didn't boast about his accomplishments. Very intelligent, an individual who had great knowledge about weapons, great knowledge about the outdoors, fit very well into society, and could be your next door neighbor.
Raymond Carr dedicated himself to catching Karl Gu Gaugin, and he was about to get closer to his suspect with a surprise discovery deep in the Pennsylvania woods. Karl Gu Gaugin, the Friday night bank robber, executed a string of perfectly staged bank robberies over 3 decades. He was so clever, so disciplined, it seemed he could go on forever. But then, a fluke discovery marked the beginning of the end. 2 teenage boys playing in the woods in Radnor, Pennsylvania, stumbled across some PVC tubes in a drainage pipe.
One of the boys noticed it, took it out, pulled out the cap, and out came maps, documents, instructions on how to clean a Beretta firearm. As fascinated as they were to see this stuff, I think they also realized this was pretty serious, and they went right to the police department that afternoon.
The secret stash was packed with information.
There were probably about 500 or 600 documents, and these documents range from locations of other bunkers throughout Pennsylvania and New York. There was also a list in these documents that listed 160 additional banks. There were bank surveillance notes. There were news articles regarding bank robberies.
And there was more than just documents.
5 weapons, a couple hundred rounds of ammunition. There was some gun cleaning equipment.
Local police were baffled. But after months with just one man in his sights, FBI agent Raymond Carr knew he was on the right track.
Once I began looking at some of the documents and the things in the bunker, and around some agents and police officers, I said, I know who this is. And they say, who is it? I say, this is the Friday night bank robber that's been robbing banks since 1989, which is all we knew at that time. I've been studying this individual for 4 months. And after studying someone for 4 months, you get a feel like you know him. And it was just more of his MO, or more of him was just buried in the ground.
The Radnor stash revealed clues which led police to Karl Gu Gaugin. In it was a letter from a karate school in Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania.
And we talked to the owners of the karate studio, and we told them what we were looking for. We said, look, we're looking for an individual who's anywhere from 5'4" to 5'8", late 40s, early 50s. He's into the martial arts. He's also, if he works with numbers. He's kind of a loner, he likes the outdoors, rock climbing, ice climbing, and he's very good with weapons. The owner gave 1 or 2 names, but one of them was Karl Gu Gaugin, and said he's a loner, sticks to himself, very intense.
The description fit the profile, but investigators needed more.
What does Karl do for a living? They said he's a statistician. And in order to accentuate that, a lot of the documents had list of books. And all these books were statistics books and math books. So when they said that, the light bulb went off, and I said, this is our guy.
The police discovered another secret cache. In it, a vital clue.
There was a pistol that was found in another search that was conducted up in the state game lands in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. And in that search, there was a little cave where we found 22 weapons. All the weapons that we had previously found had all obliterated serial numbers.
But in this stash, there was one gun with its serial number intact.
They traced it, and they found out that gun was stolen from the Fort Bragg area in North Carolina during the 70s. Now, of course, Mr. Gu Gaugin was stationed in the Fort Bragg area during the 70s.
This serial number provided authorities with a significant breakthrough in the case. It was Gu Gautien's interest in firearms that would eventually lead to his downfall.
He seems to have had a fascination with guns from an early age and got into some early trouble with the law, and that was proved to be one clue that would lead Ray Carr and the FBI to link him up with all of these bank robberies.
Finally, the police had a concrete suspect. Now they could start running background checks.
We got some fingerprints that were Mr. Gu Gautien's fingerprints, and they in fact ended up matching fingerprints that were on documents inside of the bunker.
Agent Carr was determined to arrest the man who eluded him for so long. He and his colleagues staked out one of Gu Gautien's favorite hangouts, the library.
We knew Carl had been in there before because of the fact that in some of the documents were topographical maps, and we were able to trace those back to the Philadelphia Free Public Library.
On the morning of February 7th, 2002, Karl Gu Gaugin planned to do some research for his next robbery. He had no idea that a SWAT team would be waiting for him.
When we arrested Carl, I think he was kind of stunned.
Finally, Raymond Carr came face to face with the man he'd hunted for so long.
He's everything I thought he was. As you get to know him and he gets to know you, he becomes comfortable with you. We talk about just about everything. Extremely easygoing. Not the type of high-strung person that you're used to dealing with when you think of bank robbers.
The evidence against Gu Gaugin was powerful, but still, not a single witness could place him at the scene of the crime.
I think that we had a pretty decent case against him. And it was not without risk, because it was a completely circumstantial case.
The FBI finally unmasked the Friday night robber, but would the prosecution have enough evidence to convict him? Karl Gu Gaugin had been robbing banks unhindered for nearly 30 years. The FBI had brought him down, but in court, he was pleading not guilty.
He always considered bank robbery as a sort of victimless crime. I don't think he really took into account the effect that it had on individuals who were in fact in the bank.
Some witnesses to this day will not step into a bank.
He terrorized people, and I don't think he realized that. And, I wanted him to know that what he did not just affected me, it affected my family.
In court, Karl Gu Gaugin was forced to confront the witnesses to his crimes.
I think that the victims disturbed him a great deal. I think that he was visibly uncomfortable with the victims.
He just kind of had his head down and just really didn't want to look at any of us. I don't really think he wanted to see what our reaction was.
Faced with the evidence and the testimonies of his victims, Gu Gaugin changed his plea to guilty. He was sentenced to 17.5 years. But now, this mastermind uses his talent to help his former adversaries. He's taken part in a training video designed to help the FBI track down bank robbers.
We've talked to him about why he chooses banks, how he prepares in robbing his banks, and that's given us a lot of insight for training purposes for new agents and for law enforcement officers throughout the country.
There's not anyone, I think, who's probably more qualified to talk about how bank robberies are executed or the mind of a bank robber than Karl Gu Gaugin. He was a master at it, and I think we're fortunate that he was in fact apprehended.
After almost 30 years as a criminal mastermind, Karl Gu Gaugin is finally putting his skills to good use.
And I told Carl, what you've done is bad, but now you have a chance to rectify and turn things around. And you're given this chance. Not many people are given that chance. And Carl agreed. And Carl has turned things around.